chasing the miracles of science to improve people's lives. For us, it's really about finding ways of getting things done smarter. When you're curious, you're going to ask things in a different way than you would if we were just trying to get an answer from A to B. You know, and ultimately I always say that every extra day that we spend in development is one day that we're taking away from a patient getting better faster.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Vietnam Innovators. I'm your host, Hao. Thank you for tuning in week in and week out to hear stories, human interest stories about Vietnam. Without you, the show would not be possible. Today, we have a guest all the way from Paris. We have quite the track record of executives and leaders from Sanofi here, but one in particular that is quite new in Vietnam, at least in terms of topic and discussions. We're very privileged to have him here today to kind of dive deep into the topic. Raj Verma, the Chief Culture, Diversity, and Experience Officer from Sanofi. I got that right?
You perfectly right.
Yeah, I was thinking right on top of my head. I didn't write it anywhere. So CDE, also known as CDE.
Yeah, you'll never forget that now.
Okay, yeah. And Raj is visiting all the way from Paris. He's English though.
I am.
Raj, welcome. Your first time in Vietnam.
It is, yes.
So first impressions. What's it like weaving through the traffic and seeing the towers and
you judge everything by time, not distance. I've realized a long time ago in Southeast Asia, but this morning was relatively free flowing, so I was quite pleased to be able to get up at 3:00 in the morning when I flew from Manila. So I've got my coffee now, so it's keeping me going.
So a full day like you. I flew early in the morning. I flew from a little island called Phu Quoc, which is like a holiday island. Woke up at 5, not quite 3. Got here, went straight to the office. You did as well, more or less?
Totally.
Okay. Yeah. So Raj is on a bit of a Southeast Asia tour, and he's visiting all the global offices, at least in Southeast Asia, this trip to get a pulse on what's going on. So I just want to start there. What's the pulse at Sanofi right now? Give us the quick elevator pitch about what the year is going to be like for Sanofi, especially in the context of perhaps what you do. Just a short one to lay the land.
I think 2025 is going to be an extraordinary, brilliant year for Sanofi. We've been working since 2019 on our transformation called Play to Win. When our CEO joined in December of that year, he'd laid out a 6-year plan. And it was really about making sure that we modernized the organization. And we've been working through that since then. And everything's been leading up to where we are heading today. And we're moving into an environment where we're going to have potentially 12 blockbuster medicines that we'll be able to launch over the next 3 to 4 years. And that's huge for a pharma company and especially from where we've come from. So it's super exciting, a lot of change, a lot of transformation that's taken place. Looking forward to it. It's first week back for many of us around the world. And we're going at 100 miles an hour.
Amazing. And I just want to, from an outsider's point of view, just kind of list out a few of the achievements on that milestone. I don't know if it's listed on that 6-year plan, but everything from the rebranding of Sanofi, that's the iconography, the typography, the logo, looks great, by the way.
Thank you.
And everything to, I believe, also the spin-off of Opella, which has been in the news, but it's happening later this year, which is the CHC arm, I believe, of Sanofi. So today you're in the capacity of Sanofi, which used to also include Opella, but soon not to, at least directly. So I just want to sum it up a little bit. What is the goal of Sanofi through this 6-year transformation, if you were to sum it up briefly?
Do you know, we spent a lot of time thinking about the purpose of the organization. I was lucky enough to be part of the working group that pulled that together, and we landed with a headline which is about chasing the miracles of science to improve people's lives. So when people recognize and understand that purpose, that's when things start to connect. So everything we do ladders up to that. And ultimately, we want to transform the practice of medicine. By doing so, we want to be a modernized organization. So for us, it's really about finding ways of getting things done smarter.
Okay.
And maybe I'll get a chance to speak a little bit more about how we're doing that. But ultimately, the big picture is really about improving people's lives. And everything we're doing is always laddered to that.
So, my notes here talk about that, everything from AI to increasing investments in R&D. And I want to lay the groundwork a little bit because my mom's in medicine as well. So she gives me little hints. I ask her, oh, yeah, I'm taking this new product called Pharmaton, which is under Opella now. Or like my doctor's recommended this, vaccine or whatever. Generally, all good feedback from Sanofi products, by the way. So that's good.
Good to hear.
But I want to touch upon the theme of like this idea of prevention versus treatment, which I think captures the spirit of what you're trying to do at Sanofi, like improve people's lives. And I think that just starts with prevention, right? Not just like getting sick and then getting treated. Yes, there's cases for that, of course, but also just starting from the basics, like preventing it from happening in the first place. So with saying that, I want to touch upon my second note about the strategy and R&D. You guys are using, I just want to share that for the audience so the questions make more sense. AI is skyrocketing. It's still unfamiliar to the public though. How is it being used in R&D at Sanofi? And what specific areas are you guys really benefiting from when you put these products out to market?
So we really want to be the first pharma to use AI at scale. And we're all in on AI. Honestly, I don't think many organizations have a choice. It's how fast you get there. And the way we talk about AI in Sanofi is in three buckets. So we talk about expert AI, we talk about generative AI, and we talk about snackable AI. So expert AI is really where the R&D piece is. So this is really the complex, the really big thinking piece around identifying molecules and working through the process faster and quicker. And the discovery part of the drug gets much more robust using AI. Generative AI we're using really to help us with launches, to help us with product design, the labeling, the naming, the look and feel. And snackable AI, that's probably one of the most powerful game-changing things that we've built in. Because what we're doing, we're putting AI in the hands of our managers. So in Sanofi, we have an app called Play. And that is real-time information that a manager can use to make a decision in the moment. Everything is live, from how many drugs are being sold or medicines are being sold, where we may have a potential challenge with supply chain. You can break it down by product, by country. It just gets into a whole granularity of information that previously it would take an awful long time to get that information to a manager to help them make a decision. Amazing. But also what we're doing now is looking at AI agents and how they're helping us, and like Copilot, I guess, helping us ask better questions, helping us think about, well, actually we haven't thought about, what about X, Y, and Z? So this is really in partnership. And we talk a lot about AI by itself is never good enough. It's AI plus human. And responsible AI is so important to the way we do business at Sanofi. Our ethics and business integrity team work really closely with the AI group, and what we've done is we've built into our code of conduct. And every employee is mandated to take the training of code of conduct, which means they understand a little bit more about the use of AI in the workplace. So we're setting the ground rules, we're helping people engage with the technology. And the one thing that I've learned around AI, it's really the questions that you're asking are more important than what the technology can actually do. So and that's where the human plus AI comes in.
Right. Well, people are saying online nowadays that the highest paid people in the future, perhaps even in the very near future, is actually like a prompt writer, someone that knows how to prompt AI to then create the best response.
And I think that's, for me, that's such an important part, because you don't get trained in writing prompts, right? You think based on your own biases, your own experiences, your own knowledge. I do it in Google. I could ask the same question as my son in a very different way, and we get two completely different answers. And that's, pretty basic stuff for me anyway. And it's amazing that if you spend more time in asking the right question, you get a far more robust response.
Well, you can say the same with management and leadership, actually, if you think about it, to make it more relatable somehow. Because when you mention these terms, snackable AI, which I really love, by the way, because when you just mention AI, it's not like it just flows over people's heads a little bit, but it's somehow a little bit more relatable. You can speak to it like a real person. And that's what prompt writing, which is a terrible way of putting it, but is essentially the same.
So asking smart
we
questions.
ask people questions and we add context, and you get better results.
And I think what's interesting is that, if I think about the future of work and I think about the types of skills that we want our employees to have, one of the biggest things is around curiosity. Because when you're curious, you're going to ask things in a more, I don't know, in a different way than you would if we were just trying to get an answer from A to B. And I think that is where you get some of those breakthrough moments. Something perhaps that you hadn't thought about coming back to you because of the way that you've articulated the problem you're trying to solve. And ultimately, that's all AI is. It's helping us solve the problems that we've identified.
Talking about AI, and we'll touch upon it later, is also how it relates to what you do and what you're in charge of specifically at Sanofi. We'll touch upon that a little bit later. But finally, I want to talk about, you mentioned a lot of breakthrough medicines on the horizon. How does it fit into the company's broader strategy to keep, putting so many investments into R&D rather than just kind of sit on your laurels?
So I'm new to pharma. I've only been in pharma since I joined Sanofi 4.5 years ago. And what I didn't appreciate is that the growth and value of a pharma company is predicated on its pipeline. So organizations will always ensure that they've got the pipeline, because you get loss of exclusivity at some point when your drugs start to lose their patent and they become generics. And what we've tried to do is really think about what do we want to be. So we want to be an immunology powerhouse. So I mentioned earlier when we launched Play to Win at the end of 2019, halfway through we looked at Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is when we decided to really double down our investment in the R&D pipeline. And it was the right thing to do because it's about the long-term sustainability of the organization. And we'd been building for the first 3 years the framework, the modernization, laying the slabs, if you like, to get things moving. So investing in our pipeline in R&D is essential. And what we've done, and we've shared, 12 potential blockbuster drugs to 2030, that if we can get, and not all of them potentially will all hit, because that's the way pharma works, but if the majority do, then they're huge impact on our patients. Patients with unmet needs, in places where advanced therapies aren't yet available, and looking at different indications of certain assets. All these things are made so much faster, smarter with AI, but also the right investment, so we're prioritizing. We can't do everything, and maybe we're not good at some things, but what we're focusing on is immunology. And our biggest blockbuster today is Dupixent, and I think that focus has really helped us think about the future and then 2030 and beyond.
By the way, that completely explains the Opella relationship too, which is, I imagine, a massive cash cow, but it's really on products that have been around for a while, maybe iterations made. Just by the way, it makes a little bit more sense now. And it's awesome. I think it's great because, to really make these breakthroughs, we need heavy investments from the private sector to cure people and prevent a lot of diseases. So,
and also I think, the strategic decision around Opella is that we want it to be super successful. So not being under the pharmaceutical regulatory environment for what you would say would be FMCG pretty much, gives a much more opportunity to grow much faster in different markets and to take that ahead. And it allows us to focus on our core business.
Yeah, great. That captures the picture very well for me. Thank you. Thanks for setting that tone for that strategy and that R&D focus, because I know Sanofi, I've spoken to some of your colleagues here in Vietnam, and they're really excited for the change, but they need to also explain to a lot of stakeholders, the talent market included, about what's going on. And awesome. Thank you so much, Raj. I want to move over to people, culture, DE&I, and also culture, diversity,
experience.
I knew that one. So let's start there. You've worked 25 years, first time in pharma though, about global HR transformation. How have your past roles, and not just roles, but also you as a person, led you to where you are today at Sanofi?
I've been relatively fortuitous in my career that I've managed to do a multiple set of HR roles, from business partnering to running a country or running a global business unit, to doing expert roles and strategy. So when I joined Sanofi, it was very much in the middle of the pandemic. And when I met with our CEO, it was really three things that really struck me based on all the research and everything that I was seeing and hearing at the time. And we're talking sort of, in the moment of Black Lives Matter and the Me Too and everything that was stirring with the workplace and work from home. There were three things or three reasons that people were leaving companies. One was their approach to DE&I. One was the culture that people were talking about. And the third was the experiences that they were having every day. And then there were three reasons that people wanted to join a company. It was because of their approach to D&I, it was the way people spoke about their culture, and it was the way people shared their experience in the workplace. So for me, the trifactor of culture, of diversity, of employee experience was a real enabler of any transformation going forward. So I was, I guess, relatively fortunate enough to be able to shape my own job. I knew I wanted to join because my insight into where Sanofi was looking to go, I was truly inspired by my conversations with the people that I met, and I felt I could really make a difference. And the experiences that I had, both global, local, functional, shared service, really allowed me to think about things in a very different way, taking more of a 360. So I'm a generalist HR guy. Right, so I've done bits of everything, and sometimes you need that business commercial lens when you're looking at specialist areas, because it keeps things pragmatic, and you're looking at the so what of what you're doing, and not just doing it because it's a tick box. And I think that's really important. And that was the first conversation I had with our CEO, is that to make that difference, you've really got to focus on the things that are really hard to measure. And D&I was always seen as a nice to do. Culture was, well, how do you really measure and manage it? And experience, well, what's that? We know about consumer experience, but nobody talked about the employee experience. So I joined during COVID. I didn't meet anyone for 9 months because we were on lockdown. And we launched an awful lot of stuff through technology. And it started to land. And I think that's where my experience of being able to engage with our leaders at the ExCom, our country leadership, my peers in people and culture, really helped me influence and use some of my understanding of where they would be coming from as I'm presenting different ways of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, very unique circumstances in terms of your joining and COVID happening and then launching these things. And I think, D&I has been a huge talking point, especially in Western countries where things are a bit more diverse. By the way, everyone, we just did a little panel talk at Sanofi with a lot of industry leaders and talking about this and how it relates to Vietnam as well. And Southeast Asia, I'm sure it's so different from where you're based in Paris. But let's talk about the working environment and workforce. I mean, I'm sure there's global values that tie everyone together. Let's touch upon what those are exactly, and why Sanofi has decided to make DE&I so important given those values.
So, let me take a step back. When I was looking at this earlier this year and all the work we'd done over the past 3 years, I wanted to be able to share a story around the big picture. So we created what we called the culture wheel. So there was so much stuff happening, and what I was hearing was that, we don't know how that connects to that or how that connects to that, so can you help us? So we started to tell the story, which was that everything we're doing ladders up to our culture, which is our play-to-win culture. And to get to that play-to-win culture, we have 4 behaviors. And those 4 behaviors are stretch, think one Sanofi, act for patients and customers, and take action. So these 4 enable our culture to happen. Helping practice those behaviors and make those into habits are a whole bunch of tools that we've built. And they are, in my mind, culture levers. One of those culture levers is D&I. It just happens to be our superpower now because we've invested so heavily in building it into the everyday that it's now just part and parcel of how we speak in Sanofi. So those behaviors are what we practice every day. And one of the things that our CEO said to me was, I can feel that people are telling me in your voice, which is our engagement survey, that yes, people are practicing the behaviors, but I don't see it in the performance necessarily. how do we connect those two up? No company has done this. So we sat down and we thought about, well, feeling a culture, you also need to see the impact of that culture. And that is where you demonstrate the impact. So what we did, we built 12 biomarkers, co-created them with our leadership, with members from around Sanofi, because we co-create a lot of stuff in Sanofi. It's not just somebody sat in Paris determining what needs to happen. We build with the countries. And we ended up with 12 biomarkers. Basically, for each behavior that we had, we allocated 3. And they were all measurable. And every quarter we measure, and that becomes that collective story about the progress that we're making, because by practicing these behaviors, look at the impact it's having on our performance. And that really brings that level of confidence that people have into the fore to say, hey, if we do more of that, look at what's happening, because the metrics are moving. So that see and feel bit is new to Sanofi.
Can you give us one biomarker just to frame?
Okay, so for example,
your favorite one.
If we say, think one Sanofi.
Okay.
So instead of putting yourself first, put the organization first. We have a biomarker which is about adherence to a preferred supplier list. When we started, it was roughly, 60, 70%. As we measure, it's moving towards 80, 85, until it gets to best in class, which is 95 plus. Because you're always going to have companies that you have to use that aren't on your list.
Yeah.
The point being that before people just decided themselves locally which company to work with, which supplier to use, which agency that they've known that they want to give some business to, but it wasn't helping big Sanofi. And now we're being much more rigorous, because if you're thinking one Sanofi, what you'll do, you'll start with the PSL, the preferred supplier list, because we've already got contracts and agreements and arrangements in place that benefit the whole organization, not just parts of it. So our aim is to obviously get to 95 plus.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
But we're measuring it, and we can see where in the organization that's not being adopted. And then we can support those areas to understand the why.
So that's for governance reasons, cost savings, probably efficiency, standardization.
But also, we want to be rigorous with the organizations and partners that we work with. We want the partners that we work with to have similar values to ours. We want them to also think about the diverse suppliers that we use. We want them to be more aligned to what's important to us. So that's how we choose some of our partners.
Yeah.
And we spend an awful lot in billions with our supply chain. So it just makes sense that if we can reduce the spend that's not in PSL, those euros, dollars and pounds go back into R&D, right? And as I go back to the start of my conversation, R&D is where we want to overinvest, and that's where we want to really drive the future of Sanofi.
That's a great way to think about it. When I talk to finance, sometimes it's just like about saving money or spending money here, but it's actually kind of filtering down into that key North Star goal, which is increasing R&D.
It is. And I think that's why the storytelling is so important in our organization, because if people understand the why, they're more likely to engage in it.
I feel like I'm doing a masterclass right now because I'm running my company. I'm just like, how do I convince people or think about it this way? It's not just about making money. It's like, there's got to be a greater mission to it.
And ultimately I always say that every extra day that we spend in development is one day that we're taking away from a patient getting better faster. Right?
Yeah, true.
So we want to be
hundreds
so
of people
fast
could
to
be
market.
losing their lives because that drug
exactly, and we want to get to market and get to our patients much faster than we possibly can. And that's why the whole notion of modernization is built. You can put all the best tools in the world together, but if you haven't got the culture that goes with it, it's a really hard game to play. So you have to get the behavior set, the attitude, the way we do things at Sanofi right. And we've got to be performance driven. It's the behaviors are great, but if there's no consequence of poor behavior, then it doesn't move the organization further forward. There's got to be a performance element, but we want to do things with empathy. Our culture is about supporting people, helping them be the best versions of themselves.
We could spend like a whole podcast talking about each biomarker, let alone 12. Unfortunately, we don't have the time for that today, but I just want to put it out there because it's actually very fascinating. And just hearing you from that does motivate me to be more curious about how you guys run the company as an outsider, at least. Really cool. Like very well done. Congratulations. I want to talk about localization of these initiatives. Yeah. Of course, you mentioned, again, this is a very small one in the big picture, but this one biomarker, unifying suppliers for a number of different reasons, leading to higher R&D success. Now, Vietnam, one of the bigger markets in Asia, I believe, if not one of the largest ones. And it's very unique in a way. We just finished this panel where we talked about the various kind of indicators of DE&I, and we talked about everything from having representation from socioeconomic groups, from ages and genders, and those are the simplest ones to measure, right? How would you say, with your international experience, have you balanced the need to localize these things, especially in Southeast Asia?
I think, so when we launch strategies or policies, we always take a global view, so they're transversal. But some of them you have to localize because one size will never fit all, and it's a bit of a cliche, but we try and go with 80-20, right? 80% of the work that we've done to create a global framework, we've done it with the countries as well, right? So it hasn't been done by just a handful of people. So there's no big surprise. But we also know that every country has a nuance, whatever that may be, politically, legally, culturally, that we have to respect, and we will respect. And it's how you manage that so that people feel part of the solution and not feel done to. So, this is where the education awareness comes in. So if people can understand the why of what we're doing and then the so what, they're more likely to find ways of minimizing the difference but still respecting the nuance in that country. So a simple example around the work we've done around parental leave. I'll just take that. So we put a global policy together where the minimum standard was 14 weeks for anyone who needs to go on maternity or paternity leave, 14 weeks paid. Anywhere in the world from day one of joining our company. Because we have a view that if you're in Vietnam or if you're in Mexico, why would you have a different experience? Because we want to create a global standard. We know the markets may be different, but we're edging up, not pulling down. So in some markets, it could be 24 weeks because that's what the law dictates. Other markets could be 2 weeks. So we've done our best to give everyone the 14-week window for them to take time off if they're adopting, they're having a baby, surrogacy, same-sex partners. The point being that countries have been able to nuance it based on what they legally can do, but everyone's being lifted up.
I want to talk about this 80-20 analogy you offered. Is that official, by the way?
That's just that's Raj's version of having worked in global organizations for many years.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies have used that ratio for various things. But so 80-20. So, 80% of this 6-year journey, was it, of the global strategy for Sanofi, or more or less more than halfway through that, if not more. Sounds like that 80% has more or less been, pretty good concrete foundation. How far along in that 20% would you say? Is it pretty far along? Is there a lot of work to be done still? If so, what does that work look like?
I think we are moving definitely in the right direction. So I talk about things like global operating procedures. I know it doesn't sound very sexy, but we have hundreds around the world. And what that's doing is taking away valuable time from people. Of them managing and running and rewriting something locally that actually you don't need to, because there's a global standard. And that's what we've been working through over the past 12 months, and we will continue to do so. And where there's a legal requirement for something different, of course, we would adhere to that. So it's less about being 80-20, specifically. It's about the attitude and the approach people take. We don't want anyone to feel as if they're being done to. That's the most important part of the culture that we're building. We want people to be part of the decisions, the choices, and for them to understand the why. And then it's fine, because there will always be an exception somewhere for a very good reason. but unnecessarily so just because we've always done it this way. That's not gonna.
Well, what are some of those special exceptions? If you were to just cherry pick a couple, if you were to. By the way, I'm asking these questions because I'm sure after this, all the team of HR across the world of Sanofi will listen and then know, like, oh, I'm just going to listen to that podcast with Raj and get the answer.
It could be things like we have a global product, say. So we have culture talks, great example, and we've just done one today. And we've built these culture talks as a way of helping people build greater psychological safety within their teams. So we'll have a series of 12. They're 3-minute videos with 3 questions, and then you facilitate a conversation. We've had over 50,000+ people go through these over the past 2 years, and we've got another 3 being released this year. We built them with psychology in mind. So we haven't just said, oh, here's a video, here's 3 questions, off you go. We've created a theoretical notion of a topic. So today, for example, was inclusion. And there are 3 questions that we built to help draw people into that conversation. And the aim is that should be equally valid everywhere in the world, so that everyone has the same experience, because we've given them the toolkit. But quite often you see slight subtle changes or things. And I think where we need to do a better job centrally is to explain why it's been done in a certain way and why changing it may have an unintended consequence of maybe not hitting the expectation that we had. So that's just a very small example. Okay. Yeah. And you only actually see that when you go into the countries and you start to experience and immerse yourself in some of those examples. But some of the other things, like we have Bravo, which is our first global recognition platform. Before that, only 3 countries actually had a recognition process. And again, we wanted a global standard. So we put in a global standard with global technology, so anybody in the world can recognize another person in another country and vice versa. And they get points which turn into rewards, which you can then buy stuff off a catalog. It's not the monetary value, it's the whole notion of, hey, Hal, thank you for that. That was a great presentation that you did. Because you have to explain why you're giving somebody a Bravo award and which behavior have you seen come through that conversation. That is the stuff that reinforces. And I'm so pleased to see that that's been used globally. I was in Manila yesterday and they shared some of their data of how well it's being used and how people have really grown to apply it, so it becomes a behavior. And I'm sure it's exactly the same in every other country in the world. But the point being, people have the tool. Our job is to encourage them to use it.
Very good. Thank you. Hopefully I've answered a few hundred people's questions just in those couple minutes. I want to talk about gender gaps. I think, let me just put it out there. I think Vietnam is fairly balanced in a way, if not even more women in some cases. Sure. But not to say that's better or worse, but it's balanced at least. I'd love to hear from you why there are more men in senior leadership positions in general, just from your perspective. And perhaps that's even the case at Sanofi. Yeah. I don't know. And why do companies want to reduce this gap?
So I think there's a lot of research around having gender balanced teams. So the McKinseys and the BCGs are always putting research about how they help increase productivity, profitability, engagement, and all rightly so. I think what most organizations have inherited is a male-dominated environment. And what we're trying to do, and we have been trying to do over the past 30, 40 plus years in one way, shape or form, is to redress that gap. So there's a whole bunch of things that at Sanofi we're doing. So you mentioned the gender pay gap. So our gender pay gap globally is less than 5%, right? And the way we manage that is every country has a tool that we've built centrally so that we can see where are the outliers.
Where are the outliers?
There could be a whole raft of things. There could be people who have given their salaries and they're much lower than what we are stating is the range for the role, but for whatever reason the managers said, oh, I can get them cheaper. That's not what we want. So now we're calling out that type of behavior by putting data in front of managers and say, look, this is a range for the job. And actually now we've stopped asking people what their external salaries are globally. So if you're applying for a job, here's the range. Based on your experience, it'll be somewhere in that range. We don't need to know what you were earning. That starts to take away some of the difference in pay gaps. I think the other thing is around some of the policies that we're putting in place. So I mentioned parental leave. Now that men can take as much time as women with 14 weeks, a hiring manager isn't going to be biased towards, well, if I hire a man, he's not going to go on paternity leave for 40.
Yeah.
Yes,
that happens a lot, actually. Yeah, it does.
So we want to break that mentality. But the other thing is, what we've also realized is that men aren't taking it. Men are not taking the full 14 weeks because we measure it all. So now we're trying to understand why. What is it that's stopping you from taking the full 14 weeks to be with your new child?
What is it? Do you know?
For some, it's, if I haven't got time in the office and a great new project comes up, I might miss out. Or I'm going to be out of the promotion race if I'm away for 14 weeks. Or if somebody come and does my job better than me, they may not want me.
Well, would women say the same thing though?
100%.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So this is the type of thinking that we really want to call out. You can only do these things through conversation. These are not things that you want to put under the table. These are things that you want to bring to the fore. And our CEO is brilliant at calling some of this stuff out. And that really sets the tone from the top. And succession planning, such an important part. So what we've said is that for our executive roles, we want 50-50 succession, men and women. And if you don't have female succession, you need to go and find it either externally or take risks. But we want to see credible candidates who can take executive positions. And that's actually part of our XCOM's goals. So it's very, very clear. We're very serious about it. I think some of the other things that we've done is having balanced interview panels. So no longer can a man, as an interviewer, just interview 2 or 3 people. It's now a panel. And actually what we're saying is that for your shortlist, we want a balanced and a diverse set of candidates, not just 2 men or 3 men and 1 woman. It's got to be balanced because that drives a different behavior. And data is such an important part of all of this because we can use that and identify where bias is coming in and then start to deal with it. And the final thing I'd say is that, table stakes for us is that every manager goes through inclusive leadership training. So they understand their own potential biases and how to recognize those, how to find smart ways of getting other people to give different perspectives, how to make the right choice. Because we're only ever going to appoint based on talent, always. But we need to make sure that people have equal chance of competing for the very best jobs.
I want to talk about the next topic, which is AI. And you mentioned things like training for teams. I see in my notes here about you have an event called the AI plus education, equals inclusion event. I assume data is driving a lot of what you mentioned in this event. Can you tell us more about that event, number one, and how does it explore the intersection of AI? And you keep mentioning the importance of data. We'd love to hear about that.
So look, I think there's 2 things. We have a brand called Inc.Forum, and each year our CEO will host events with C-suite or heads of, and so we've had 2. The first one we had was on AI, education and inclusion, and the one just gone in October was around the DE&I backlash. And next year this year we'll do something different. The point being that we want to be thought leaders, but we also want to bring the outside in. So we'll have panelists from different organizations who will share their experience. So we had people from Google, from Uber, from Orange, sharing how they're using AI, ethical AI, how they're challenged by AI, and what can we learn from the same. And there was a professor from HSC, which is one of the schools there, who said that ultimately, she wants to be able to see herself in AI. So is AI taking into account her difference? So when I talked about responsible AI, these are the types of things that we're constantly thinking about. Our people insights function really is moving a faster pace than anything I've seen in terms of helping us with, hey, this has come up. Do you think it's worth exploring a bit more? Because there may be correlations, which we hadn't thought about before. There's bias in the system, we know, but we couldn't figure out where. So we're using data, being very data-driven with the decisions we're making on what to prioritize.
This is wonderful, by the way. I think you caught a great wave, and Sanofi sounds like it's been able to integrate because, and you mentioned the backlash as well. Lots of movements, especially with governments around the world, and among other things, which we won't go into today. Have been commenting on it, and I think to have that rational perspective on things, be very data driven. At the end of the day, if the data says it's quite compelling. So,
and especially being a science company, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point too. I'd love to hear about how the strategy extends beyond the workplace. How does it affect the people that are working at Sanofi outside of the workplace, and possibly driving social impact, especially when we talk about these places in the world like Vietnam, for instance. We just had discussion about underprivileged communities having job opportunities at Sanofi, kind of unearthing true talent gems that we're not looking in the right places.
So when we were putting the DE&I strategy, or chapter 1, together, we built it around three spokes: the workforce, the workplace, and the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So the workforce is really about representation. Have you and are you representing the community and the patients that you're supporting? The way that we are looking at the workplace, all the policies that we're putting in, this culture of psychological safety, being anti-racist, all those things that we've been working through. And finally, the marketplace, about the impact on society and the community. Mm-hmm. So we work quite closely with that third pillar with our CSR colleagues. And there's maybe 2 or 3 examples I can share. Supplier diversity being one of them, and responsible sourcing, and where are we finding opportunities for people who met organizations that are women-led, for example, or led by people with disabilities. Are we giving them chance? So we mentioned the Inc.Forum events. Mm-hmm. They were wholly supported by our diverse suppliers. For all of the food that we provided, the entertainment, everybody had a story, and we put their story on a QR code. Mm-hmm. So as our guests were enjoying the food, listening to the music, they could go on the QR code and understand their story, whether they were immigrants or whether they were hard of hearing or whatever the circumstance that got them to their business. Mm-hmm. Brought it to life. So supplier diversity, we made a very clear commitment that we will spend no less than 1.5 billion euros a year with diverse and small and medium enterprises. Mm-hmm. Clinical trial diversity, a huge part in our industry. And how do we make sure that we're getting the right patients part of those trials, mm-hmm. that are diverse?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's an impossible task over the past few years for every pharma to try and do that. And we're now using technology to help us identify, engage, and start to build relationships. The other thing I would say is around volunteering. So we do a lot of volunteering and supporting. So people get 1 to 2 days volunteering a year, and everywhere in Sanofi to do things in their community. The big ticket item I would say around making an impact in society is what we launched at Davos 2 years ago, called 1 Million Conversations. 1 Million Conversations is our very first externally facing DE&I commitment, which is about bridging the gap between marginalized communities and healthcare when it comes to trust. We know that if you are from a marginalized community, you are likely to be less trusting of healthcare, mm-hmm. for a whole variety of reasons. And that is built out of 3 very clear pillars. One is around scholarships. So we provide 100 scholarships a year to marginalized groups, to take them through their degree or their postgrad, and then to bring them into Sanofi into a specific role, whether that's as a researcher, a scientist, in digital, in marketing, or whatever that may be. Mm-hmm. Dialogues. A second pillar is around internal dialogues. How do we create the space for people in marginalized groups to have safe conversations about what it feels like when they're going to their doctor, when they're trying to get medicine, even though they're in the industry, mm-hmm. do they still feel a lack of trust? And why is that? And then externally, connecting with our patients or potential patients, what is it that you find when you're trying to get access to medicine? And then finally, the third pillar is how do you influence the system? So using the information from pillar 2, which is the dialogue, and external research and report, what policy papers are we writing for different government bodies to say, can we look at this or you should look at that? And we've got an advisory board from around the world to help us support that. We've invested 50 million euros into this program to 2030 because we're determined to make a difference that starts to chip away at that notion that trust isn't there between marginalized communities. And we know that if you're LGBT in certain countries, it's even harder. And if you are intersectional with different diversity strands, it's even harder again. Mm-hmm. So we started with 5 markets. We've added another 5 last year, and there's another 5 coming in this year. And that covers around 80% of the Sanofi world. Mm. So every year with 100 scholars, by 2030, we should have close to 900 people who have been brought into Sanofi into key roles from marginalized communities who are also trust ambassadors in their own communities. So we start to build a ripple effect. And this for me is the story of healthcare, that if we can bridge that gap, then we are creating the very best experience for people to give them equal access to our medicines.
I was thinking throughout the whole time, it's like, wow, this is like another level of like the college campus ambassador. This is like another level. If you distill it down to, I was trying to think of how can I relate to this? I was like, but brilliant. I think the way that you guys are thinking about that, really working with the community. We just got a last couple questions here, Raj. What are the main milestones for your remit for 2025? And how do they align with this one objective of increasing R&D development, like becoming the leader for that?
I think that there's a couple of things. One is we need to continue doubling down on our focus on culture and continuing to, capture people when they join so they understand the organization that they're joining. And our employer brand is getting stronger by the day. We've had many people who said, we've joined because of your work in DE&I or in clinical trials or the growth of people that you're moving around the world in terms of mobility. So the proof points are there. And we're asking our own employees to share their own story, not for us to share it for them. And that makes a big difference because we're not trying to be a filter here. We want people to genuinely share what's good, bad, or indifferent about our organization. We're never going to be looking to sell the dream for people to feel they're living a nightmare, right? That is not the way we do things in Sanofi. So that's the first thing. So that biomarker of really doubling down our culture continuously, you can never take your foot off the gas. The second thing is we're now moving on to chapter 2 of DE&I. The first 3.5 years, we've hit 80% of our 9 KPIs a year early. So we're now accelerating to chapter 2. So instead of focusing on the inputs, we're now going to be focusing on the outputs. And I call that the diversity dividend, right? What are we getting for our patients ultimately as a result of the work we're doing, first of all, to put into Sanofi? So that work starts, in fact, next week, 12-week sprint for us to then launch by the end of the first half of 2025. And that's a big piece of work, and that's going to really flow into the overall narrative of the culture work that we're doing. There's lots of mini projects that are happening around the employee experience. We've created an employee experience model called 765. There's 7 touch points in the employee life cycle. Where are the bits that have the pain for people? How do we try and solve those pain points and start to build a far better end-to-end experience for people? There's millions of little points, right? So we're picking the ones that we're getting the feedback on that actually would better if we had a more engaging A, B, or C, and then we'll double down on that.
Okay.
So, we have 5 big in the people and culture world, 5 big breakthrough items with lots of stuff that's ongoing, but it's all integrated and connected to the business performance and the overall picture. So our roadmaps are very clear year on year.
Very well thought out. I had truly enjoyed this podcast, Raj. Thank you so much. Everyone, that was a masterclass in HR, people, D&I, and many other things, how to link that back to performance. Thank you so much, Raj. I'm imagining you, waking up at 3 a.m., get on your flight from Manila to here, and you're in the taxi, in the car on the way from the airport. What were some of the things you were curious about Vietnam? And the question basically I'm asking is, we have you here today to share as an expert in this field and representing Sanofi, but what kind of industry and guest can we invite on the show so you can learn something about Vietnam? It could be anything, not HR related necessarily.
I think for me, what would be great is to understand. I was reading earlier that it's the biggest ecosystem of startups in Vietnam. What is it that's driving that? And how can organizations learn from that spirit of progress? How can they be change makers in their own organization? Because there must be something, right?
Just though something's in the water to make it so
exactly. So what is that secret sauce almost that we could replicate, and what's that type of energy that's required? And I'm looking at the next generation of people coming through, and the Gen Alphas, I guess, that are knocking on the door of employment. How do we really embrace that generation? There's 5 generations in the workplace. You look at generations, then you look at culture, and you have to find that intersectionality, because the world is far smaller than it was when I started working. So how can we leverage that? And it's probably in places that you wouldn't typically have thought of. So that would be really interesting from a lens as a global corporate leader. That where can you identify pockets of excellence that you can leverage?
Very good. Yeah. I wish I had more time to answer that question for you, but I don't. But if you feel like you can answer that question, or somebody that would, leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear from our audience on that particular topic. Raj Verma, the Chief Culture, Diversity and Experience Officer of Sanofi, based in Paris, coming all the way here to tour Southeast Asia, making a stop here in Vietnam, one of its most important markets in APAC. Thank you so much, Raj, for being on the show, and I look forward to having you back, perhaps at the end of this 6-year global strategy unfolding for Sanofi. I'm sure you've made a lot of progress. I've been seeing it from the outside, talking to different stakeholders across the business. So congratulations to the whole team, and again, looking forward to that whole unfolding. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Vietnam Innovators, everyone. That was Raj Verma from Sanofi. If you'd like to know more about Sanofi, I will leave some comments in the description below so you can access more information. Thank you so much, Raj, and best of wishes on the rest of your jaunt through Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much.
See you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.